The massive council chamber thrummed with quiet tension as the Galactic Council debated humanity's place in the galaxy, dismissing Earth's strength with cold, calculated superiority. The representatives, all from vastly different alien species, sat in their elevated positions, their eyes glowing faintly with the intensity of their discussions. The air was thick with a sense of detachment, as if the very idea of human emotion, let alone human strength, was beneath them. Each of the species represented was far more advanced, both technologically and culturally, than the humans they had reluctantly accepted into the Galactic Alliance. Humanity's history, rife with war and chaos, was often discussed in hushed, almost mocking tones. They were viewed as an infant species, too immature and volatile to be taken seriously in the eyes of the galaxy's elites. At the heart of the chamber stood the representative for humanity, a seasoned diplomat whose name had been known to many within the Alliance for years. Calm, composed, and carefully trained to navigate the complexities of intergalactic diplomacy, they entered the room with a demeanor that gave little away. The human diplomat, however, was no stranger to these meetings, and despite their outward composure, they could feel the weight of the room press in. The past few hours had been a relentless series of pointed comments and dismissals about humanity's place in the galaxy. Humans fear war. One of the alien representatives, a being with shimmering silver skin and no facial features, said in a voice that reverberated in the silence of the room. Their tone was one of condescension, and the words hung heavily in the air, as though this fact was self-evident to all who heard it. Another alien, a towering creature with multiple limbs and eyes that shifted unpredictably, spoke next. Their culture is obsessed with the idea of conflict. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. History has shown that they will self-destruct the moment the galaxy stops holding their hand. Their voice was deep, almost growling in its delivery, dismissing humanity's progress as a mere fluke. The human diplomat remained still, their gaze unflinching as they heard these accusations. They had expected as much. But still, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Over the years, humanity had worked tirelessly to forge alliances, to prove that they could be trusted among the stars. Yet here they were again, fighting the same battle, being judged for their violent history, for the wars they had fought, not to conquer, but to survive. Fear of war is a weakness. Another representative, a being with bioluminescent skin, added in a smooth, melodious voice. Their history is filled with conflict, with destruction. They cannot be trusted to contribute to peace. How can we trust a species that has never learned to control their primal instincts? It was almost as if the Galactic Council had come to this meeting with the intention to humiliate humanity. There were murmurs of agreement among the species present, each of them feeling vindicated in their assumptions that humans were too chaotic, too unpredictable, too primitive, to be part of the greater galactic community. The diplomat felt their pulse quicken, but they held their ground. They were not about to let their people be dismissed so casually. With all due respect, the diplomat said, their voice steady and firm, I must disagree. A few members of the council turned to regard the human representative with interest, their eyes narrowing in curiosity. Some were skeptical of humanity's claims, but most were simply indifferent, knowing full well that humans were outmatched in nearly every aspect. Humanity's history, the diplomat continued, is indeed filled with conflict, but to call it fear of war is a simplification that undermines the very essence of who we are. They paused, gathering their thoughts before speaking again, their voice echoing through the chamber. We do not fear war. We fear losing what we have fought for, the loss of our families, our homes, and the very core of our existence. We fear being erased from the stars, having our stories forgotten. But above all, we fear surrendering our humanity. The council members exchanged skeptical glances. Then why do they continue to fight? One alien asked, the question dripping with disdain. Why do they continue to escalate conflicts? It seems their bloodlust is endless. The diplomat took a deep breath, but their voice remained controlled. We fight because we are resilient. We fight because, time and time again, we have been pushed to the edge of extinction. And each time, we have come back stronger. Not because we are violent, but because we are survivors. We fight not for the thrill of conflict, but because it is in our nature to protect what we hold dear. There was a slight stir in the room, as some of the members considered this, but the dominant voices continued to dismiss humanity's explanation. No, the bioluminescent alien said, their voice cutting through the tension. You mistake your aggression for strength. A true species, one that has evolved past such primitive impulses, does not engage in war. They evolve. They learn to rise above such baseless violence. The diplomat's eyes narrowed as the familiar sting of frustration began to build. They could feel the weight of history pressing on them, the weight of every conflict humanity had endured, from the ancient wars on Earth to the desperate battles fought in the name of survival during humanity's expansion into the galaxy. What these aliens did not understand was that humanity's strength did not lie in avoiding war, it lay in their ability to overcome it. And yet, in this room, humanity's entire essence was being questioned. They had risen from the ashes of conflict, rebuilt societies, formed alliances with species that once saw them as unworthy. They had adapted, learned, and thrived despite the odds. But to the Galactic Council, that strength was viewed as a flaw. Let me make this clear, the diplomat said, their voice unwavering. We are not like you. We have never been like you. We are not bound by the same principles or ideas of peace that you value so highly. But that does not mean we are weaker for it. Our strength comes from our spirit, from our will to survive, to build, to create. We fight because that is how we have always existed. Their words hung in the air like a challenge, daring the Council to look beyond their own prejudices and acknowledge the true essence of humanity. Yet, the silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. And in that silence, the diplomat knew that they were losing the battle, that no matter how much they tried to explain, no matter how many times they defended humanity, these beings would never understand. They were too far removed from the struggles that had shaped the human spirit. Too disconnected from the raw, chaotic force that had driven humanity to the stars and beyond. The diplomat clenched their fists at their sides, their knuckles white with the force of their grip. It seemed hopeless. The Council would never change their minds. Not here, not now. But perhaps there was another way to make them understand. The silence that followed the diplomat's words was heavy, suffocating. The Council's representatives exchanged subtle glances, their expressions unreadable. The weight of history seemed to hang in the air, but despite the diplomat's impassioned defense, the room felt colder than ever. They could feel it, the dismissiveness, the undercurrent of superiority in the Council's reactions. Humanity, despite everything they had accomplished, was still seen as nothing more than an unpredictable, emotional species that had no place among the stars. One of the representatives, a being whose crystalline body shimmered with a light that shifted in intricate patterns, spoke again. We understand your desire to defend your species, human, they said, their voice smooth and impersonal. But we must remind you that this is a meeting of the Galactic Council. We do not make decisions based on emotions, especially not those born from the primitive instincts of your kind. The diplomat's jaw tightened. They had heard this before, in different words, from different voices. The same arrogant assumptions about humanity's emotions being a weakness, something that the more enlightened species of the galaxy had evolved beyond. They could feel the anger rising in their chest again, but this time, they held it in check. If they were to convince these beings of humanity's worth, they would need to do so with cold, calculated precision. We don't fight for the sake of fighting, the diplomat said, their voice calm but firm. But we fight when we are pushed. We fight for survival, not just for ourselves, but for everything we hold dear. We are not the aggressive species you claim us to be. We fight because our survival is at stake. And when our survival is at stake, there is no limit to what we will do. The words hung in the air, but the response from the Council was not what the diplomat expected. A quiet chuckle rippled through the room, an undercurrent of ridicule. A tall, serpentine creature, whose long, sinuous form coiled around its seat, leaned forward, its many eyes fixed on the diplomat. Survival? It hissed, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. Survival is not a matter of brute force. It is the ability to avoid conflict in the first place. You speak of survival, but what you truly mean is that you are afraid of being conquered, afraid of extinction. But what you do not understand is that in this galaxy, those who fear conflict are ultimately consumed by it. The diplomat could feel the sting of the creature's words, but they did not back down. They had faced worse in their years of service, alien species who had mocked humanity, dismissed their existence as insignificant, as nothing more than an obstacle. And yet, despite everything, humanity had persevered. They had overcome the odds. "You mistake fear for strength," the diplomat said, the word sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "What you see as fear, we see as determination. We do not run from war. We have faced wars that would have broken lesser species, and yet we stand. We face our battles head-on because we know that it is only through struggle that we can grow stronger." The room was still. The council members were not speaking, but the atmosphere had shifted. The diplomat's words were landing, but slowly, hesitantly. The condescension that had once been so obvious was now tinged with uncertainty. Some of the representatives, though silent, were no longer looking at humanity with the same dismissive air. It was a shift, subtle but noticeable. One of the oldest members of the council, a being whose massive form seemed to absorb the light around it, spoke next. Its voice was low, gravely, as though it had not spoken in centuries. "I have seen many species in my time," it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. "Some were warriors, others were builders, but I have never encountered a species like yours. Your resilience is impressive." The diplomat's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. But they knew better than to show hope too soon. The council might have recognized their resilience, but that didn't mean they would back down from their stance. Humanity's place among the stars was still far from certain. "We do not seek conflict," the diplomat replied, their voice steady. "But we do not shy away from it. We will not be crushed under the weight of your judgment, nor will we be ruled by fear. You think you know what it means to be strong, but you have never experienced what it's like to fight for survival, to fight against extinction. You have never had your back against the wall, with no choice but to rise up and overcome. That is the strength of humanity." The words resonated deeper than the diplomat anticipated. The room was quieter now, the once dominant voices subdued. The council's skepticism had not dissipated entirely, but the diplomat's words had planted a seed. The idea that humanity could be more than just a primitive, emotional species was beginning to take hold. Another representative, a sleek, insectoid creature with translucent wings, spoke, its voice almost reverent. You are not as weak as we thought." The words were tentative, almost as if the speaker had just come to an uncomfortable realization. It was a crack in the armor of the council's superiority, and the diplomat seized on it. "No," the diplomat said, their voice low but fierce. "We are not weak. We are not defined by our wars, nor by our fears. We are defined by our will to survive, by our capacity to endure. That is what makes us stronger than any species you have ever encountered. We do not fall, we rise. And that is why we belong here, among the stars." The room remained still, the weight of the moment sinking in. The council members were looking at each other now, no longer with disdain, but with something else, something they had not expected to feel when they first entered this meeting. Humanity was not the primitive, weak species they had assumed. The diplomat could feel the shift in the room, the tide turning ever so slightly in their favor. The story of humanity's survival, their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, had begun to resonate with those who had lived through their own struggles. And though the battle for humanity's place in the galaxy was far from over, for the first time, the diplomat felt a flicker of hope. The seeds of understanding had been planted. The true strength of humanity, its spirit, its determination, its ability to overcome, was no longer something to be dismissed. It was something to be reckoned with. The tension in the room thickened as the council absorbed the human diplomat's words. It was clear that their previous arrogance had begun to unravel, but that didn't mean they were ready to accept humanity's place in the galaxy. Their minds were still entrenched in their long-held views, believing that peace was the highest form of existence, one that didn't require the messy complications of war. But the diplomat wasn't here to convince them that humanity was perfect. No, they were here to make the Council understand something far more important, that humanity's strength lay not in avoiding war, but in enduring it. The silence that followed felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on the room. A few of the representatives were still processing the diplomat's words, unsure how to respond. The human diplomat knew that this was the tipping point, the moment that could either win humanity a place in the Galactic Alliance, or push them even further into the margins. They took a deep breath, their mind racing as they formulated their next words. A member of the Council, one with skin that shimmered like liquid metal, finally broke the silence. "Your words are compelling, human," the representative said slowly, their tone no longer condescending but contemplative. "But what you fail to realize is that the universe operates on a different scale. The destruction of a single planet is a tragedy, yes. But it is not the end. The greater galaxy does not see the loss of a single species as a catastrophe. We have seen entire civilizations wiped out, and yet the universe continues. Your fight for survival, while noble, is but a small fragment in the grand design." The diplomat clenched their jaw but maintained their composure. They had anticipated this line of thinking. To the beings in this room, the destruction of a species was merely a ripple in the vastness of the cosmos, a fleeting event in the endless expanse of time. But what they didn't understand was that to humanity, each life mattered. Every fight, every battle, every victory was a testament to the collective will of a species determined to live. "You are right," the diplomat replied evenly, their voice cutting through the weight of the Council's assumptions. "One species' survival may seem insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But you underestimate something critical. The survival of a species like ours is not just a matter of numbers or resources. It's about the spirit of the people who fight to keep their culture, their identity, their way of life intact. It's about the sacrifice of individuals who are willing to give everything for the greater good of their species. Humanity has fought not just to exist, but to thrive." The words hit the room with force. The concept of human survival being tied to something more profound than sheer numbers or power was foreign to the Council members. But it wasn't just the diplomat's words that were starting to have an impact, it was the raw emotion behind them, the truth that no amount of technological superiority could obscure. "You speak of fighting for survival," the crystalline being interjected, its voice tinged with uncertainty. "But why? Why continue to fight when peace is within your reach? Why not embrace the unity we offer?" The diplomat took a long, deliberate pause, the weight of the question hanging in the air. This wasn't just about peace, it was about what humanity stood for. And in that moment, the diplomat realized that the reason they had been so impassioned, so furious, was because they understood something the Council members didn't. Humanity's fight wasn't for peace at any cost. It was for a world that valued the very essence of being human. "We don't fight for war, we don't fight for destruction," the diplomat said, their voice low but resolute. "We fight for our right to exist on our own terms, for our ability to choose our own path, for the chance to create a future without someone telling us how it should be. You say peace is within our reach, but peace without freedom is nothing more than submission. We may not have the same ideals as you, but we have fought every day to ensure that we never lose the right to choose." The room stilled. The diplomat's words carried the weight of centuries of struggle, of wars fought not just with weapons, but with the very fabric of human identity. The beings in the room could not understand that struggle, but they could hear it, feel it in the diplomat's voice. It was an undeniable truth that seemed to reverberate through the chamber. The serpent-like representative leaned forward, its many eyes narrowing. "So you would rather continue to fight than accept a chance at true peace?" it hissed, its voice laced with disbelief. "You are willing to risk everything, all you have worked for, just to preserve your pride?" The diplomat's gaze hardened. "It's not about pride. It's about honor. It's about preserving the integrity of what it means to be human. We will not give that up, not for peace, not for anything. If peace comes at the cost of our identity, then it's a peace we don't want. We will never trade our freedom for an illusion of harmony." The Council members were silent. Some were nodding, others exchanging looks, but none spoke for several moments. The diplomat felt a sense of unease rising in them, realizing that the Council's final judgment was still up in the air. They had made their case. They had laid out humanity's soul, its spirit, its history of survival against all odds. But it was clear that the true test would be in how the Council responded to that. Finally, the elder member of the Council, the one whose form seemed to absorb the light around it, spoke again. "You have shown us a different side of humanity," it said, its voice softer, more contemplative. "Perhaps we were wrong to underestimate you. Your species is not weak, not in the way we thought. But you must understand that the galaxy operates by a different set of rules. A species that cannot see the value in peace is one that may ultimately destroy itself." The diplomat stood tall, their eyes unwavering. "A species that sacrifices its freedom for peace is one that destroys itself long before war ever comes. We will not be that species." There was another long silence, the kind that hung thick in the air, leaving the future uncertain. The diplomat knew they had fought the best battle they could, but in the end, the decision was not theirs to make. The Council would either accept humanity for what it truly was, or they would push them to the edge. And humanity, as always, would stand firm. One by one, the representatives looked at each other, their expressions now softened, no longer filled with disdain or arrogance, but something far more complicated: respect, hesitation, maybe even fear. For the first time, they saw humanity not as a fledgling species, not as a species that would be easily swayed or eradicated, but as one that had the strength to stand on its own, regardless of the cost. And in that moment, the diplomat realized that this was the true measure of humanity's strength, not in how they avoided conflict, but in how they had always risen, fought, and endured. No matter what came next. The silence that followed was heavier than the last. The diplomat's words had reverberated through the chamber, leaving the members of the Galactic Council to wrestle with a truth they hadn't expected to face. The walls of their superiority were beginning to crack, and in those cracks, they saw humanity, not as a primitive species, but as one with an undeniable resilience that couldn't be ignored. The diplomat stood at the center of the room, the weight of the last few moments still pressing on them. They weren't sure what to expect next. Perhaps the Council would respond with further insults, further challenges to humanity's worth. Or maybe, just maybe, there would be a shift, an understanding. They could only wait. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Some members of the Council fidgeted, others muttered among themselves in languages the diplomat couldn't decipher. The serpent-like representative, who had questioned the diplomat most aggressively, now looked as if it were deep in thought. The metallic being that had first spoken seemed torn between admiration and skepticism. A shift was happening, but it wasn't yet clear how it would unfold. Finally, the elder representative, the one whose form seemed to absorb light, rose from their seat. The room quieted instantly, the other members turning their attention to them. The elder's gaze swept across the chamber, and when they spoke, their voice was measured, reflective. "You speak of freedom, of survival, of the very essence of humanity," they began, their tone soft yet carrying an undeniable weight. "You have shown us a side of your species we did not fully comprehend. We have underestimated you, not out of malice, but because we failed to understand your spirit. Your determination. It is formidable." The words hung in the air, the first real acknowledgement of humanity's strength. The diplomat remained still, their pulse quickening. They had known this moment would come, they had hoped for it. But hearing it from the elder representative, someone who had so casually dismissed humanity just hours earlier, felt like a victory. A quiet one, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. "We once believed that peace was the highest virtue," the elder continued. "That the ability to avoid war, to transcend the primal urges of conflict, was the ultimate sign of progress. But now, we see that there is strength not only in avoiding war but in withstanding it. You are a species that has endured, that has fought, that has sacrificed in the name of something greater than yourself. And for that you deserve respect." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room, the other members exchanging looks. There was a shift now, a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere. The diplomat's heart pounded in their chest, but they forced themselves to remain calm, to not let the rush of emotion cloud their judgment. They had already said their piece. Now it was up to the council to decide how they would act on it. The crystalline representative spoke next, their voice still filled with a trace of doubt. You say humanity's strength lies in its endurance. But can you truly survive, in the long term, without the kind of peace we offer? Without the unity we propose? There was an air of uncertainty in their question, as if they weren't sure whether they were speaking to challenge or to understand. The diplomat took a deep breath, their voice steady as they responded. We don't need to survive peace, we need to survive the challenges that come with it. Peace is not something that can be handed to us. It's something we must build, one step at a time, through hard choices, sacrifice, and yes, sometimes, even conflict. We don't shy away from those challenges. We face them head on, because we know that only by doing so can we remain true to who we are. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The diplomat wasn't offering submission, nor was they asking for approval. They were simply stating the truth. Humanity would not bend for the sake of peace. They would endure it, fight for it when necessary, and in the end, they would prevail. The room fell quiet again, and the metallic being, whose sharp features had once been twisted in skepticism, now looked contemplative. Perhaps we were wrong, it said slowly, its voice softer. Perhaps we have misunderstood your species. There is more to strength than simply avoiding conflict, as you've shown us. The diplomat's eyes flicked from one representative to another, their expression unreadable. They had won this moment. But they knew better than to think this was over. The council's judgment was still in the air, and humanity's place in the galaxy was not yet secured. The diplomat could feel the weight of the decision looming, the balance between acceptance and rejection hanging by the thinnest of threads. The serpent-like representative spoke again, their many eyes narrowing in thought. So, what would you have us do, human? What would you have us offer you, now that we see your strength? There was a certain grudging respect in their voice now, but the question still carried an undercurrent of doubt. The diplomat's gaze never wavered. What I ask is not just for acceptance, but for recognition. Humanity is not a species to be dismissed, to be relegated to the fringes of the galaxy. We are strong. We are resilient. And we are ready to stand side by side with other civilizations. But we will not compromise who we are in order to do so. If you wish to form an alliance, let it be one built on mutual respect, on equality, and on the recognition of our strength, not just our ability to avoid war, but our ability to face it, to endure it, and to rise above it. The room was still, each representative turning inward, processing the weight of the diplomat's words. It was clear that the council was no longer as sure of their original stance. But whether that would translate into action remained uncertain. The diplomat had made their case. Now, it was a matter of how the galaxy would see humanity, not as a fearful, primitive species, but as one with an unyielding spirit. The elder representative, who had spoken first, stood again. We have heard you, human, they said, their voice thoughtful. We will not make a decision in haste. But know this, you have shown us a new perspective. One that will be considered carefully. Your strength, your endurance, your spirit, it has made us rethink our view of your species. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The diplomat stood tall, feeling the weight of the council's words pressing against their chest. There would be no easy victory. But the battle for humanity's place in the galaxy had shifted in their favor. It was no longer about avoiding war. It was about standing firm, enduring the worst the universe could throw at them, and proving that humanity had the strength to rise, no matter the odds. The decision was far from final, but the diplomat knew one thing with certainty: humanity had made its mark. And the galaxy would never look at them the same way again.